Hello everyone. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. That way, YouTube will make sure to keep showing you stories just like this one. Now, let's begin. This happened to me last summer, and I need you to understand what went down in the Ozark National Forest. I'm 32, an electrician in Little Rock, and I've been a dedicated solo backpacker for nearly a decade. That Saturday in late June was supposed to be a standard weekend escape. I was out early, parked near a little-known trailhead about 40 miles outside the city, and set off on what was planned to be a 15-mile backcountry loop, a section that sees virtually zero foot traffic. By 9 in the morning, the heat was already oppressive. You know that thick Arkansas humidity that turns your shirt into a second skin in minutes. That's what I was battling. My gear was the usual kit: a lightweight pack, 2 liters of water, trail snacks, my reliable GPS, and a small fixed blade knife on my belt. The first few hours were serene. It was just me, the rhythmic scream of the cicadas, the occasional rustle of a squirrel, and the crunch of my boots on the pine needle-covered ground. Around noon, I heard a creak. I decided to leave the trail for a bit and bushwhack down the steep ridge to check it out. That's the moment everything went wrong. After 20 minutes of scrambling down the slope, fighting through thorny thickets and dodging webs, I pushed through a dense curtain of mountain laurel and stumbled straight into a permanent encampment. This was no ordinary backpacker site. This was a sprawling, makeshift settlement, at least half a dozen shelters constructed from blue tarps and rope, a fire pit with fresh, smoldering coals, clotheslines hung with laundry, and utter filth everywhere. The ground was littered with empty cans, cigarette packets, and dozens of liquor bottles, mostly cheap whiskey and rock-gut vodka, as if they'd been aggressively tossed after being drained. The stench immediately assaulted me, a foul combination of unwashed bodies, spoiled food, and something else, something chemical and acrid that burned my nostrils. Propped casually against a massive oak tree, I counted 4 rifles and 2 shotguns, along with several boxes of ammunition stacked on a piece of plywood. My sole instinct was to retreat, to vanish before the occupants of this squalid mess returned. The sheer volume of unattended firearms made it clear these were not simple homeless folks. I began easing backward, trying to avoid snapping any twigs, when movement in my peripheral vision froze me solid. About 30 feet to my left, partially obscured by a thick pine, someone was standing perfectly still, observing me. It was a woman, probably in her mid-40s, wearing a stained tank top and cut-off shorts, her hair matted and hanging in greasy strands. She didn't speak. She didn't move. She just watched me with a vacant, blank stare that sent a jolt of alarm down my spine. I raised my hand in a gesture I hoped looked friendly, forcing a smile. "Sorry," I managed to say. "Didn't mean to trespass. Just got turned around looking for the creek." She didn't acknowledge me. Didn't even blink. Then I caught more movement. To my right, behind me, all around the perimeter of the camp. They were everywhere. I counted at least 8 people, maybe more, positioned silently among the trees as if they had been lying in wait. Men and women of various ages, all in worn, filthy clothes, all fixed on me with that same unsettling, expressionless gaze. None made an aggressive move. They simply stood, strategically placed to cut off every escape route. The closest was a skinny young man with a scraggly beard, standing 15 feet away beside a makeshift table, an old door balanced on cinder blocks. On that table, I saw plastic baggies filled with a white substance, a digital scale, and a row of what looked like burner phones. The chemical odor I'd first noticed instantly clicked, and my mouth went bone dry. They weren't just squatting. They were running an illegal lab out here, and I had just walked into the middle of their operation. The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, though it was likely only 30 seconds. Then, from behind one of the larger shelters, an older man emerged. He was noticeably different. Cleaner, better dressed in a crisp, gray button-up and dark jeans, wearing actual leather boots. His silver hair was neatly tied back, and he moved with a confident, proprietary stride that immediately marked him as the leader. He approached slowly, stopping about 10 feet away. When he smiled, I noticed his teeth were white and straight, a stark contrast to the meth mouth I'd glimpsed on some of the others. "You're pretty far off the beaten path, friend," he said, his voice calm and unnervingly cordial, like we were meeting for coffee. "GPS must have led you astray. Happens sometimes. These devices don't always account for the old trails. the ones that aren't on the official maps. I kept my own voice as steady as possible, agreeing that I'd been following what I thought was a deer path down to the creek and had clearly gotten confused. He nodded, still smiling, then started in with questions. Where had I parked? How long had I been hiking? Did anyone know where I was today? The queries sounded casual, but the underlying menace was palpable. He was trying to determine if I was alone, and if anyone would come looking for me. I lied. I said my girlfriend was expecting me back by 5, that she had my real-time coordinates on a safety app, and that she'd already texted me twice for an update. His eyes narrowed slightly. He pulled an old flip phone from his pocket and checked it. No cell service out here, he stated, not as a question. Hasn't been for years. Tower companies don't bother with this part of the forest. My stomach turned to ice because he was absolutely right. I hadn't had a signal for miles, and we both knew my bluff was called. He took a step closer. I instinctively backed up, which earned a short chuckle. Relax. Nobody here wants trouble. We're just folks who prefer living off the grid, away from all the government oversight and surveillance. You understand that, don't you? Sometimes a man just needs his freedom. Behind him, 2 more people had emerged from the tents, both carrying what looked like hunting rifles, though they kept the barrels pointed down. One of them, a heavy, set man with a thick red beard and a scar from his ear to his jaw, walked over to the makeshift table and began casually packing the drugs into a black duffel bag, never once breaking his stare at me. The leader continued, his tone still friendly, but a sharp edge of warning had crept in. The problem is, friend, you've seen our little community here. That puts us in an awkward position. We value our privacy, you see. We have to, considering how the world treats people like us who just want to be left alone. So now we need to figure out how to resolve this situation. The woman in the yellow tank top, a Julie, had drifted closer. Her arms were covered in scabs and scratches, some fresh, and her pupils were so dilated her eyes looked almost black. She was constantly scratching at her neck with dirty fingernails, muttering under her breath. The leader noticed me watching her. Don't mind Julie. She's going through a rough patch, but we take care of our own here. He gestured around the camp with unsettling pride. Everyone here has a story, a reason they can't be part of regular society anymore. Some got pushed out, some chose to leave, but we've built something here. A real community. We look out for each other, share what we have, protect what's ours. His hand moved to rest on his hip, pushing back his shirt just enough for me to see the grip of a pistol tucked into his waistband. And we're very, very good at protecting what's ours. A running was suicide. They knew the terrain, they were armed, and I was surrounded. I tried to play it cool. I told him I completely understood, that I was just a hiker who took a bad turn, and had zero interest in anyone's business. I even made up a story about my own brother being hassled by police just to try and build some kind of connection. The leader listened, head tilted, then looked around at his people. A silent communication passed between them, nods and subtle gestures I couldn't interpret. Finally, he turned back to me. Here's what's going to happen. You're going to walk with me and my associate here. He pointed to the red-bearded man, who had finished packing the bag. We're going to escort you back to the main trail. You're going to forget you ever saw this place. You're going to forget these faces. Forget this conversation. Because if you don't, if we see any cops sniffing around here, or rangers or anyone asking questions, well, he didn't need to finish. The red-bearded man made a throat-cutting gesture that was crystal clear. They made me empty my pockets first, taking my phone, my GPS unit, and even the little digital camera I had clipped to my pack strap. The leader scrolled through my phone's photos while the big man checked my GPS history, ensuring I hadn't marked any waypoints near their camp. Clean. The big man grunted. They returned everything except the GPS. That stays with us, the leader said. Consider it a small price for your education today. Then we started walking. The leader in front, me in the middle, and the red-bearded man behind me, his rifle now cradled in his arms. The rest of the group stayed put, but I could feel their eyes on us until the thick trees consumed us. We walked in silence for 20 minutes, pushing through dense undergrowth, following no discernible path. The leader navigated the forest with the instinct of a lifelong local, never hesitating. I could hear the heavy breathing of the man behind me, and the occasional grunt as he had to duck under a low branch. When we finally reached what the leader called the main trail, It looked like just another barely visible path to me. He stopped and turned. "Your car is that way," he said, pointing north. "About 3 miles. Should take you an hour if you move quick." He took a step closer, close enough that I could smell coffee and cigarettes on his breath. "I want to be very clear about something. We know what you look like now. We know your name from your license. We know you're from Little Rock. If anything happens to disturb our peace here, we'll know who to thank for it. And friend, you do not want that. We have people in town. People who can find anyone, anywhere. This forest is our home, and we protect our home with extreme prejudice." The red-bearded man added, "Saw your parking pass too. Nice blue Ford pickup. Arkansas plates ending in 472. Be a shame if something happened to it on one of those dark city streets." The threat was so casual and matter of fact that it hit harder than any screaming would have. The leader gave me one last unsettling, friendly smile. "You seem like a smart man. Smart men know when to keep their mouths shut. Don't make us regret letting you walk away." Then they turned and melted back into the forest, moving so silently I lost sight of them within seconds. Even though I was staring right at where they'd gone, I stood there for a full minute, confirming they were really gone, before I started hiking north as fast as I could without actually running. Those 3 miles felt like 30. I kept glancing back, expecting to see them follow, but there was only the relentless repetition of trees and shadows. When I finally spotted my truck through the trees, untouched and alone in the small gravel lot, I nearly collapsed with relief. I drove straight home. I didn't stop for gas or food or anything. I just white-knuckled it all the way back to Little Rock. I never even told my family. It's been 4 months, and I still constantly check my rearview mirror, still flinch at the sight of a blue tarp, or the faint whiff of that chemical smell. I know those individuals are still out there, producing their illicit drugs and living their twisted version of freedom. But I also know their threats were deadly serious. Sometimes, keeping quiet isn't about being a coward. It's about being smart enough to recognize when you're completely outmatched. Last fall, I was 24, working at an outdoor gear shop in Colorado. Most weekends, my co-workers and I hit the trails, seasoned hikers who'd rather be on a mountain than sleeping in. This particular October day started like any other. My co-worker Jason, his girlfriend Melissa, our friend Connor, and I set out for a less-known trail system about 2 hours from Denver. The weather was perfect, crisp autumn air, golden aspen trees everywhere. We'd packed for an 8-mile loop, promised to be beautiful backcountry. I joked with Connor that we'd only see deer, or maybe some wild turkeys, nothing exciting. We had no idea what we were heading into, or how quickly a perfect day could turn into something that still makes me check my rearview mirror in wooded areas. About 3 miles in, Jason spotted what looked like an old logging road. It branched off the main trail, barely visible through brush and fallen leaves. We weren't in a rush, plenty of daylight left. Jason thought it might lead to an old mine or cabin, as Colorado is full of abandoned sites from its mining past. The path was rough, clearly unused for years, with thick undergrowth scratching our legs and low, hanging branches forcing us to duck. After about 15 minutes of pushing through, we reached a small clearing. The trees opened just enough for sunlight to filter through. Right there, partially hidden by tall grass, surrounded by rusted beer cans and old campfire remains, was a beat-up white van, probably early 2000s. It looked like it had been there for months. Tires deflated, windows covered in dirt and pine needles, rust eating through the wheel wells. But what really grabbed us were the back doors, slightly ajar, as if someone had tried to close them but couldn't get them to latch. Connor joked about finding a serial killer's hideout, and we all laughed nervously, but curiosity got the best of us. Melissa stayed back a few feet while Jason, Connor, and I approached the van, our boots crunching on broken glass and leaves. The smell hit us first, a thick, musty mix of mildew, rotting fabric, and something metallic mixed with organic matter that I couldn't quite place. Jason reached the back doors and used a stick to push them open wider. The hinges screamed, as if untouched for ages. What we saw inside made us all instinctively step back. The van's floor was covered in women's belongings, purses, shoes, jewelry, cell phones, all different styles and sizes, like they'd been collected from various people. But that wasn't the worst part. Bolted to the walls were heavy, duty metal restraints, like those in a prison transport vehicle, with thick chains attached. Dark stains on the floor beneath them made my stomach churn. Melissa whispered that we needed to call the police immediately. She was absolutely right, but we had no cell service this deep in the woods. Connor was already backing away, saying we should head back to the main trail for help, when we heard it, the distinct sound of branches breaking behind us. Not an animal, but deliberate, heavy footsteps. We froze, our breathing suddenly too loud. The footsteps were getting closer, coming from the direction we'd hiked, cutting off our escape. Jason grabbed a large rock. Connor pulled out his pocket knife. I picked up a thick branch, knowing none of it would do much good if trouble was coming. Melissa had her phone out, recording everything even though we couldn't call, her hands trembling. The footsteps stopped about 30 feet away, just beyond our sight through the dense trees. Then, whistling. A slow, casual tune, like someone on a leisurely stroll, completely out of place in that terrifying moment. A man's voice called out, friendly and warm, "Hey there, folks, didn't expect to run into anyone out here. You lost." The normalcy of his tone somehow made it worse. Jason squeezed my arm, subtly pointing with his eyes to a small deer path leading uphill to our right, our only potential escape. The whistling started again, closer now. Then he stepped into view. He looked to be in his 50s, wearing faded jeans and a flannel shirt, like any regular guy you'd see at a gas station. He had a genuine-looking smile, laugh lines around his eyes, and was carrying a backpack and what looked like a fishing rod. But his boots, I'll never forget this. They had fresh mud on them, really fresh, even though it hadn't rained in weeks and the ground was bone dry. He glanced at the van, and for a split second, his expression shifted. A flash of something else before the friendly mask returned. "Oh, you found my old project," he said, walking closer, positioning himself between us and both the logging road and Jason's deer path. "Been meaning to haul that piece of junk out of here for years. Bought it at an auction. Thought I'd fix it up for camping, but you know how it goes." His explanation came too quickly, too rehearsed, as if he'd practiced it. Connor, trying to play along, said we were just exploring and should probably head back. The man's smile widened, but his eyes stayed flat and unblinking. "Where are you folks parked?" "I know these woods like the back of my hand. Could show you a shortcut." He set his fishing rod against a tree, and I noticed his right hand stayed in his jacket pocket, gripping something. Melissa had lowered her phone, but I could see it was still recording. The man noticed it too, his jaw tightening slightly. "That's quite a phone you got there, miss. Do they work out here?" "Mine never does." The way he said it wasn't really a question. That's when Jason did something brilliant. He suddenly doubled over, groaning and clutching his stomach, saying he thought he was going to be sick from something he ate for breakfast. It was so unexpected that even the man took a step back, his hand coming out of his pocket, empty, as he moved away from Jason's potential vomit zone. In that split second of distraction, Connor grabbed Melissa's hand and shouted, "Run!" We scattered. Connor and Melissa took the deer path uphill. Jason bolted into the thick woods to the left. I ran back toward the van, then veered right, crashing through the undergrowth. Behind me, I heard the man curse loudly, his friendly act completely gone, followed by heavy footsteps. He was chasing someone, but I couldn't tell who. My heart pounded so hard, I thought it might explode as I tore through branches that ripped at my clothes and face, jumping over fallen logs, skidding on loose rocks. I could hear shouting now, multiple voices, meaning at least some of my friends were still running. After what felt like hours, but was probably only 10 minutes, I burst onto another old logging road, wider than the first. My legs shook, my lungs burned, but I kept moving, jogging now instead of sprinting. That's when I heard Connor's voice calling my name from somewhere to my left. I followed the sound and found him, and Melissa hiding behind a massive fallen tree, both scratched up and breathing hard. Melissa was crying but still clutching her phone. We waited, listening for any sound of pursuit, for what must have been 5 minutes, before Jason came crashing through the brush from a completely different direction. His shirt was torn, blood running down his arm from a deep scratch. He'd lost the man by going through a creek bed and doubling back. We didn't stop to celebrate. We just started moving, together this time, following the logging road, which eventually, miraculously, connected to an actual Forest Service road with trail markers. It took us another 2 hours of half running, half speed, walking before we finally reached the parking area where Connor's truck waited, untouched. The second we had cell service, Melissa called 911 while Connor started the truck, ready to leave immediately if needed. The dispatcher kept us on the line, asking detailed questions about the location, the van, the man's description, everything we could remember. Within 20 minutes, 2 sheriff's deputies arrived to take our statements. They called in more units to search for the van. We showed them Melissa's video. Her phone had clearly captured the van's interior, the restraints, the scattered belongings, and about 10 seconds of the man before she lowered it. One of the deputies, an older woman with graying hair, watched the footage and immediately got on her radio, calling for additional backup and mentioning something about connecting this to the other cases. That phrase sent a chill through me. She wouldn't tell us what other cases, just said detectives would be in touch, and we needed to go to the station to give formal statements. We spent the next 4 hours at the sheriff's station, each in separate rooms, going over every detail again and again with different officers and detectives. They had us look through photo lineups, asking if we recognized anyone, but the man from the woods wasn't in any of them. A detective named Brennan finally told us that 3 women had gone missing from trails in that general area over the past 18 months. All experienced hikers who had vanished without a trace. The belongings we'd seen in the van matched descriptions of items the missing women had with them. By the time they let us leave, it was past midnight. They gave us each a business card with a case number, telling us not to discuss the details with anyone except law enforcement while the investigation was active. They also mentioned they'd found the location we described, but the van was gone. Just tire tracks and some scattered trash remained. The man had moved the van sometime during our escape, calm enough to drive it out of there despite knowing we'd seen everything. The investigation went on for months. Detective Brennan stayed in touch, calling occasionally with follow-up questions or to show us new photos of potential suspects, but nothing ever came of it. They found the van 2 weeks later, burned out in a ravine about 50 miles away, completely destroyed along with any evidence it might have contained. The man we encountered was never identified or caught. Those 3 missing women are still missing. What haunts me most is how normal he seemed at first. How he could have been anybody. A neighbor, someone behind you in line at the grocery store, a friendly hiker. Jason ended up quitting his job and moving to Arizona, saying he couldn't handle being around forests anymore. Melissa and Connor broke up a few months later. She told me that every time she looked at him, she remembered that day, and it was too much. We all dealt with it differently, but none of us ever went hiking together again. I still live in Colorado, still work at the same store, but I haven't been on a trail since that October day. Sometimes customers ask me for recommendations for that particular area, and I always steer them somewhere else, anywhere else. The police asked us not to share specific details about the case publicly, and I've honored that. I've changed some minor things here to protect the investigation, but I needed to tell someone the real story. Last month, Detective Brennan called to tell me there had been another disappearance, this time from a trail about 30 miles from where we'd been. Same pattern. Experienced female hiker vanished without a trace. Car found at the trailhead with everything still inside. She asked if I'd be willing to look at some new photos, maybe help with a sketch artist. I agreed, but I knew it wouldn't matter. That man is still out there, probably with a different van now, maybe in a different state, still whistling that same casual tune while he hunts. If you're reading this and you love hiking like I used to, please, just remember, if you ever find something in the woods that shouldn't be there, don't investigate. Don't let curiosity win. Just run. Run. And don't stop until you're safe. Because some mysteries are better left unsolved, and some monsters look just like everyone else. The weekend after finals in early May 2018, my 3 college friends and I needed a break. I was 22, an environmental science student working at a sporting goods store, and we decided the mountains were the only cure. We were me, Brandon, Kevin, and Josh. Josh found us a sketchy, dirt-cheap cabin near Mount Hood, 3 miles from the nearest trail, surrounded only by Douglas firs and the odd deer path. It was perfect, no cell service, no week fee, just beer, trail mix, and cards. Our first day was exactly what we needed. We hiked an 8-mile stretch of the Pacific Crest Trail, took our photos and stumbled back at sunset, satisfied but wiped out. The cabin was definitely smaller than the pictures. A single main room, 2 bunk beds, a 70s kitchenette, and a toilet that needed a special jiggle. Still, after years of tents, 4 walls felt like a fortress. We cooked burgers on the ancient propane stove, played poker with pretzel sticks, and listened to Brandon tell the same story about his ex-girlfriend. By 11:00 p.m., our legs were sore and our bellies were full of cheap beer. We were ready to crash. Around midnight, I woke up needing the bathroom, my 4th beer mistake. The cabin was pitch black, lit only by the green glow of Josh's fitness watch. I was fumbling for my phone's flashlight, trying not to wake anyone when I heard heavy footsteps on the wooden deck. Not a raccoon or a deer, but slow, deliberate, measured steps circling the cabin's perimeter. The boards creaked loudly under the weight. The footsteps moved from the front toward our window, pausing for 10 seconds after every 3 or 4 steps. Kevin must have heard it too. He sat up in the bottom bunk and we made eye contact in the dark. He mouthed, "What the hell?" I just shrugged, but my chest was already tight with that gut-deep feeling that something was seriously wrong. I crept to the front window and peeled the curtain back an inch. In the moonlight, I saw a tall figure in a dark jacket and jeans, standing about 10 feet from the cabin, just staring at the building. He stood completely still for half a minute, arms at his sides, before turning and dissolving into the shadows of the massive fir trees. We woke Brandon and Josh, whispering what we'd seen. Josh, always the skeptic, insisted it was a lost hiker or the owner, but Brandon voiced the clear concern: who checks a rental cabin at midnight by silently walking circles and staring in the windows? We decided to barricade the door with the heavy wooden dresser, which made a horrifying, scraping sound that echoed in the silence. Josh grabbed the cast iron skillet, Kevin found a hiking pole, and Brandon clutched his pocket knife. I had my phone ready for a 911 call, even though we knew there was zero signal. We huddled there, 4 grown men acting like kids at a sleepover, obsessively tracking every sound: the wind, the roof's falling pine cones. For an hour, nothing happened. We started to relax, cracking nervous jokes. Josh even suggested we move the dresser back. Then the doorknob turned. Slowly, carefully, testing the lock. It jiggled once, twice, then stopped. We heard footsteps again, heavier this time, less cautious. They walked to the window on the door's left side, the one we'd forgotten to curtain. A face appeared in the glass, hands cupped around the eyes. He was maybe in his 40s, scraggly beard, baseball cap pulled low, pressing his forehead against the glass. Even though we were all frozen, I swear he was looking straight into our corner. The man disappeared, and silence settled for 5 minutes. Then came a sound that locked my muscles up: the screech of metal on metal from the back of the cabin. Kevin whispered that the owner kept maintenance gear in a tool shed back there. We heard rustling, and then the footsteps returned to the front. He didn't test the knob this time. Instead, a solid thunk hit the door, then another. He was using something heavy, a crowbar or a hammer, to attack the lock. The old wooden frame was splintering with each impact, painted chips falling onto the floor inside. Josh didn't wait for the door to fail. He started screaming at the top of his lungs. "We've called the police! They're on their way! Get the hell out of here!" It was a desperate lie, but it worked for a second. The pounding stopped. We heard the man's voice for the first time, rough and slurred. "Ain't no police coming out here, boys. Just want to talk. Open up." The way he said, "boys," made my skin prickle. He'd been watching us long enough to know exactly who we were. Brandon started recording video on his phone, and Kevin grabbed the fire extinguisher. The pounding resumed, harder now. We could see the frame bowing. When the door finally gave, it happened instantly. The frame completely splintered, and the door swung inward, slanging against the dresser. The dresser held, but there was an 8-inch gap between the door and the frame. The man's arm reached through, grasping to push the heavy dresser aside. Kevin acted instantly. He aimed the fire extinguisher at the gap and emptied it, filling the doorway with a cloud of white chemical foam. The man roared, yanked his arm back, and stumbled away, coughing and cursing on the deck. That gave us 10 seconds. Josh and I threw our weight against the dresser while Brandon grabbed the bear spray he'd been ridiculed for packing, a hatchet and some rope. The man came back, angrier, wiping foam from his face. He kicked the door, pushing the dresser back inches despite our collective weight. Through the gap, I saw him clearly weathered face, wild eyes, wearing a flannel with reflective strips. He wedged the crowbar into the opening and started prying, using his full body as leverage. The dresser scraped back inch by inch. Kevin tried the extinguisher again, but it was nearly empty, just a weak mist. That's when Brandon made his move. He lunged, stuck his hand through the gap, and emptied the entire can of bear spray directly into the man's face. The scream that followed was primal and enraged. He fell backward off the deck, clutching his face and rolling on the ground. We scrambled to reinforce the barricade. Josh and I wedged the kitchen table against the dresser, and Kevin stacked bunk bed mattresses against the windows. Brandon stood at the door gap with the hatchet. We could hear the man outside, moaning and stumbling. Then we heard the sound that saved us sirens in the distance. It turned out Josh's phone had managed to send an emergency SOS when he tried calling 911 earlier. Somehow, it pinged an emergency satellite. The sirens grew louder, and red and blue lights flickered through the trees. The man crashed through the underbrush, retreating into the woods. 2 sheriff's deputies arrived, flashlights sweeping the area, weapons drawn. He was gone. The deputies took our statements. One of them, Deputy Ramirez, immediately recognized the description: Carl Dietrich, a local who'd been fired from a logging company. He'd been living in the forest, watching hikers and breaking into cabins for weeks. They found him 2 hours later, hiding in a drainage pipe a mile away, still partially blind from the bear spray. We spent the rest of the night giving statements at the sheriff's station. The detective confirmed Carl had mental health and substance abuse issues. He said we did everything right, stayed together, fought back, and kept him out. We drove home that morning in total silence, the terrifying adrenaline finally fading. I haven't been camping since. I need to tell the real story of what happened to my brother, Nathan, last September, because the park rangers and the police won't. I'm a high school biology teacher in Montana. I've always been the rational one. Nathan, 29, was a physical therapist who hiked solo every weekend to decompress. For 3 years, he'd send me photos, goofy selfies, wildlife snapshots. That September Saturday, he chose the Highline Trail in Glacier National Park, a busy, popular route. His last text to me was at 8:47 a.m. a photo of the trailhead sign that said, "Starting out, should be back by 4." He was wearing his bright orange jacket. Mom's idea so he'd be visible. I joked he looked like a traffic cone, and he'd laughed, saying search and rescue would spot him easily. The weather was perfect, about 65 NF and clear skies, meaning at least 40 other hikers started that trail that morning. Several remembered seeing him. The orange jacket and his blue Toyota pickup were hard to miss. Around 2:00 p.m., a strange dread hit me, like realizing you studied the wrong chapter for a test. I called Nathan, which was unusual, but the call went straight to voicemail. I figured it was a dead zone. By 5:00 p.m., when he hadn't texted that he was back at his truck, I panicked. Nathan was obsessive about checking in, he never missed. I called the park service, trying not to sound like an hysterical family member. The initial search started that evening. Nathan's truck was still there, locked, wallet under the passenger seat. Rangers assumed a twisted ankle, common in the mountains. But then the Andersons, a couple from Wisconsin, came forward. They'd been hiking back around 1:30 p.m. and saw Nathan about 3 miles in, standing by a massive Douglas fir tree. They remembered him because he'd helped them with a photo earlier. When they passed him, his backpack was on the ground. He was just standing there looking up into the branches. Mr. Anderson asked if everything was okay. Nathan turned, gave them a huge, strange smile, and said, "Just perfect, actually. Have a great hike." They thought it was odd, a random spot, not a scenic viewpoint, but moved on. The full search began at dawn on Sunday. 20 volunteers, 3 dog teams, a helicopter. I drove through the night to join them. Ranger Fielding, the search coordinator, showed me the grid map, trying to reassure me that most missing hikers are found quickly. The dogs tracked Nathan successfully from his truck to that exact Douglas fir, 3 miles in. Then the scent disappeared. The lead dog handler, a gruff man named Tom, walked his German Shepherd in circles. The dog would track right up to the tree, sit, and whine, pawing the ground like Nathan's scent had simply vanished into the air. What they found at that spot is what still makes my skin prickle. Nathan's backpack wasn't dropped. It was carefully placed against the base of the tree, standing upright, all zippers closed. His phone was in the side pocket, still powered on, 47% battery, full signal. His water bottles were full, his lunch untouched. But here's the detail no one could explain: his hiking boots were inside the backpack, neatly placed, socks tucked into them, as if he had carefully removed them and packed them away. The ground was soft from recent rain, yet there were no footprints. No bare feet, no disturbed vegetation, no broken branches. Tracking experts agreed. It was like Nathan simply ceased to exist at that exact spot. I stayed for 2 weeks, sleeping in my car, hiking to that tree every morning, obsessed with understanding. Other hikers passed by, unaware they were walking through what felt like a crime scene with no crime. I spoke to everyone. That's how I found Gregory Watts, a retired Forest Service employee who'd hiked that trail for 30 years. When I described the location, his face went pale. He told me that in 1987, a woman named Carol Dunham vanished from that exact same spot. Same circumstances, backpack found, shoes inside, no tracks leading away. They never found her either. He said the old park workers called it a quiet spot and wouldn't elaborate, only saying, sometimes the forest chooses to keep someone. The official search was called off after 3 weeks, but the investigation continued for months. Nathan's phone records showed no calls after my 2:00 p.m. attempt, but one detail bothered me. His phone's GPS showed him at that tree from the 28 p.m. and once 31 p.m. Then, location services simply stopped updating, even though the phone remained on. The FBI briefly got involved, running background checks for a staged disappearance, but his bank accounts and apartment were untouched. Agent Coleman told me, off the record, that in 40 years of missing persons cases, she'd never seen anything like it. She said, with Nathan, everything was perfectly wrong in a way that made no logical sense. 4 months later, a woman named Janet Holloway called me. She drove 8 hours from Idaho to meet me. Her daughter, Rebecca, had vanished on a popular trail in Yellowstone in 2016. Same exact scenario, backpack perfectly arranged, shoes inside, no tracks. Janet said 3 days before Rebecca disappeared, her daughter called, excited about a hiker who'd talked about thin places in the wilderness where you feel an overwhelming urge to stop and step through. The hiker had warned her never to take her shoes off if she felt that urge, calling it an invitation. Janet had compiled 23 similar cases across the country, all in different parks, and every single one had the victim's shoes removed and carefully stored. The part that haunts me most came 6 months later from Nathan's coworker, Bradley. Cleaning out Nathan's desk, he found a notebook. The last 3 pages were not patient notes, but vivid dream descriptions of a forest that looked like his trails. But everything was slightly shifted. Trees at impossible angles, paths curving into the air. He felt someone walking beside him, matching his steps perfectly, always outside his peripheral vision. The last entry, dated the night before his hike, read, "The footsteps are getting louder. They sound exactly like mine, but delayed by half a second. Starting to think they're not following me. Starting to think they're waiting for me to catch up." Last month, almost a year after Nathan vanished, I went back to the tree one final time. I stood there for hours. Around noon, I noticed something carved in the bark 7 feet up, partially hidden, CD 1987 Carol Dunham. Above it, RH 2016's Rebecca Holloway. My heart hammered as I looked higher and saw it. So fresh the sap was sticky, MP 2024's Nathan Pearsett. But Nathan never carved trees. He was obsessive about leaving no trace. I took photos and called the rangers immediately, but when they arrived with a forensics team 2 hours later, the carvings were gone. The bark was smooth and untouched. They suggested grief counseling. I don't hike anymore. The Andersons reached out recently. Mrs. Anderson couldn't stop thinking about that final smile Nathan gave them. She said it looked like the smile of someone who just figured out the answer to a question they'd been asking their whole life. The investigation is still open, but I know they'll never find him. Gregory Watts was right. I think the forest did choose to keep him. All I have left is his orange jacket hanging in my closet, and the chilling knowledge that, in some way I can't comprehend, my brother found whatever he was looking for on that trail. I just wish I knew if he intended to find it. Every search dog that hit that spot went insane. They barked, whined, and spun in circles as if they'd run into an invisible glass wall. 6 different canine units, all wilderness trained, completely lost Ashley Carpenter's scent at the exact same patch of dirt, only 40 feet from where we found her gear. I volunteered with Search and Rescue for 8 years, and I've never seen anything like it. Ashley was 24, my roommate's little sister, fresh out of nursing school with a job, waiting for her at Harborview. She was an experienced hiker, and the Granite Lake Loop she chose that Saturday in early August is practically a well-worn path. 5 miles, moderate difficulty, packed with outdoor enthusiasts. At 11:47 a.m., she texted her mom a summit selfie, big smile, peace sign, her distinct red hiking boots visible. By 2:00 p.m., she had completely vanished from a trail she knew intimately. When she missed her 7:00 p.m. shift, the alarm went out. Her beat-up Subaru was still in the parking lot, permit displayed, expected return time 4:00 p.m. We deployed teams within hours, assuming a simple twisted ankle. Day 2 changed everything. Frank, a veteran volunteer whose knees clicked with every step, spotted something blue about 300 yards off the main trail, down a steep embankment covered in thorny Devil's Club. It was Ashley's expensive, insulated water bottle, standing perfectly upright against a rotting log. It had her initials, AMC, etched into the bottom, and the ice inside was still partially thaw after 36 hours in the woods. Its placement was immediately unnerving. People don't carefully set their water down if they're injured or panicking, and they certainly don't leave it behind. 20 feet away, snagged in the low branches of a hemlock, we found her lightweight purple rain jacket, folded into itself. That's when the K9 teams arrived. They scented her from a sleeping bag in her car and tracked her perfectly up the main trail, sharp left onto a faint deer path, straight down to where her gear was found. Here's where it became truly disturbing. 40 feet from that upright water bottle, every single dog stopped. It wasn't a gradual loss of scent. They reacted as if they'd slammed into a brick wall. Some backed up, others sat down and refused to move. Duke, the bloodhound, started howling, a deep, mournful sound that silenced everyone. The search coordinator, Diane, had us form a shoulder-to-shoulder grid pattern around that spot. The terrain was strange, spongy, moss-covered, dark, loamy soil, making it impossible to check for footprints. The forest canopy above opened in almost perfect, eerie circles. Ground-penetrating radar kept malfunctioning, showing weird, volatile density readings the operator had never seen before. Wednesday afternoon was when things turned genuinely frightening. We were checking a ravine, and I was paired with George, a retired firefighter, who kept remarking on the eerie silence of the birds. He grabbed my arm near a ravine that ran parallel to the trail. 50 feet below us, partially hidden by a cedar root ball, was fresh digging. Not natural erosion, but deliberate, human-sized excavation, the dirt neatly piled beside it. We called it in immediately. Everyone held their breath as they carefully removed the rest of the soil. The hole was empty, but it was meticulously dug 6 feet long, 3 feet wide, 4 feet deep, with walls so smooth and compacted they looked machine-cut. At the bottom, pressed into the dirt, was a pattern of small indentations. Not writing, but symbols pressed into the soil in a deliberate sequence. The smell rising from the hole was wrong. Not decay, but chemical, like old copper mixed with antifreeze. While forensics processed the hole, I spotted Ashley's phone tucked into the root ball. The screen was cracked but functional, battery at 12%. The last photo wasn't the summit selfie. There were 17 subsequent pictures, all taken between 1:47 and 1:53 p.m., and every one was completely black. The black photos had full location data, all taken within a 100-foot radius of the hole but at different, rapidly changing elevations, like she was being moved up and down quickly. Her last text was from 3 days before her hike, a number not in her contacts, someone named Paul. Paul had sent her only GPS coordinates. Ashley replied, confirmed for Saturday. The coordinates led to a spot a quarter mile from where the dogs lost the scent. Paul's number was a burner phone, purchased with cash at a Tacoma gas station 2 weeks earlier, used once and discarded. Security footage showed a man in a baseball cap and sunglasses, average build, ghost. Friday morning, day 6, brought the most disturbing discovery. A tourist got lost and stumbled upon a section of woods we hadn't covered, 3 miles from Ashley's last known location. He found a campsite, but described it as all wrong. The photos he showed the rangers revealed an elaborate hunter's blindy tarps painted to match the forest, netting covered in real moss, positioned to overlook 3 trail junctions. Inside were maps of the entire trail system with dates and notes. Ashley's name wasn't there, but 12 other names were. All women, ages 20 to 30, with dates going back 2 years. Some names I recognized from officially ruled accidents or voluntary disappearances. The investigation instantly exploded. The FBI arrived within hours and the mountain was closed. They brought in specialized teams and military-grade equipment. They found 7 of these elaborate blinds. Inside were notebooks filled with meticulous observations, hiking patterns, peak times, and detailed physical descriptions of regular hikers, their routines, and who hiked alone. Ashley's name appeared in the most recent entries, with notes about her Saturday habit, favorite trails, her red boots, and her regular parking spot. The handwriting analysis showed at least 3 different people had contributed to these surveillance logs. They also found industrial-grade zip ties, pre-cut rope, and bottles of that same chemical. It was a veterinary anesthetic that can be absorbed through the skin. Here is what haunts me most. On day 8, the cadaver dogs led teams to a forest section 5 miles from any official trail, an area so dense it was almost impenetrable. In a natural depression, hidden by a thick canopy and ringed by Devil's Club, they found human remains matching 8 of the 12 names in the notebooks. The forensic anthropologist said the oldest remains had been there 18 months, the newest about 3 weeks. Ashley was not among them. The FBI questioned every person who'd been on those trails, pulling surveillance from every business within 50 miles. They arrested 2 men whose DNA was found on gear in the blinds. Both had minor criminal records. Both claimed they were hired via encrypted messages, paid in cryptocurrency, to simply maintain the sites and document hikers. They never met their employers. They insisted someone else, the one they called the collections handler, did the rest. Both are facing conspiracy charges, but without Ashley's body or direct evidence of violence, prosecutors are struggling to build the bigger case. Ashley's family hired private investigators, but the official search was suspended after 2 weeks. I still drive up to those trails, now permanently fenced and closed, and think about that spot where Ashley's scent just stopped. I think about those 17 black photos. Was she documenting the darkness, or was the lens simply covered? The worst realization is knowing that the person who orchestrated this entire, meticulous operation is still out there, probably scouting new trails, picking new names to write in a fresh notebook. Ashley, whether she escaped, was taken, or met another fate, remains as absent as her scent beyond that mysterious spot where even the best dogs couldn't follow.